Hey everyone, it's Michael. I'm back with another Adventure Guides virtual camping video. Today we're going to talk about how to select a campsite and then I'll show you guys how to pitch your tent. So to start out, the number one most important thing when we're choosing our campsite is we want to minimize our impact on the earth by selecting a site that looks like it's already an established campsite. A lot of the times when you go to a state park or a national park, you'll find areas that are designated campsites. They'll usually have some railroad ties around them. They're marked with gravel. But if we don't have that, so we're out here at Camp on the Lake, you can see around me there's not a lot of shrubs or grass growing around me. It's mainly dirt, and that looks like a good spot to set up my tent. The second thing that we want to be aware of is we want to make sure that there's no overhanging branches that look like they're going to fall on us. So if I look up and I'm looking around, we've got some nice tree cover, which can be nice. It'll help break the wind, help break some of the rain or hail if anything happens. But we're looking specifically for any branches that look like they're going to fall. This spot's pretty good. None of these branches are particularly concerning to me, so I think we're good to think about our next part, which is we want to make sure that we're on pretty much totally flat ground. There's nothing worse than waking up in the middle of the night and you've rolled all the way down to the end of your tent because gravity's pulling you down. So on this spot, we are at a very, very, very minute angle, which I think I'm okay with. And then the last thing that we want to think about when we're selecting our campsite is we want to be at least 200 feet away from any water source. So that could be from a river or a stream. In this case, we've got the lake way out in the back behind us, so we're well over 200 feet. The reason we want to be 200 feet away is flash flooding can be very serious. And we never know when it's going to happen, and we don't want that water to rise up and fill up our tent while we're sleeping. So once you've gone through all those 4 steps there, you're ready to start pitching your tent. So I'm going to kind of back up and I'll start walking you guys through it. Okay, so once we've selected our campsite, we're pretty much ready to start setting up our tent. One thing to keep in mind as we go through this video is every tent is going to be a little bit different, so some of the steps that I do may be a little bit different from you if you have a different tent at home. So what we're going to do before we even open up our tent is we've got our campsite, but we want to clear out any of these rocks that are on the ground. So 1, we don't damage our tent, and 2, we're not sleeping on rocks that are going to be poking us in weird spots in our back. So we see all these rocks and we can kind of kick or toss them out of the way. Big sticks and things like that, you want to get out of the way as well. So we'll clear all these out. And that should be good. I'm going to keep this rock for one of our steps later. We'll set this off to the side. So next thing you do, obviously, open up your tent. I've never seen a tent that's not rolled, so yours is probably rolled up. Make sure that you take your tent bag and set it off to the side so that you don't lose it. And then you can just roll it out. Start to unfold. Then you'll want to take your tent poles and your tent stakes and set those off to the side with your tent bag as well. You may be wondering what this giant sheet of plastic is bundled in with your tent. There's 2 things that it could be. Some tents come with what's called a ground cloth, which is just a fancy word for tarp. If you're camping in colder weather or in wet weather, you may want to put that ground cloth down again to help protect your tent, and it'll help insulate you from the temperature. For me, I don't have a ground cloth, so this is my rain fly, which is the other large piece of plastic that usually comes with your tent. We're going to set this off to the side, but this is what's going to help block all the rain and precipitation and give us some shade when we're in our tent. So now that we've got our tent laid out, gonna kind of stretch our corners out. I'm gonna have my door facing you guys. This one has 2 doors, so both doors on both sides, which is great. Then we're gonna take our tent poles and get those extended. With all of your bags and things, make sure you keep track of them. And most tent poles are great in that they just pop together like so. It's important though, make sure that you don't stress them out too much because you don't want to break them. Nothing's worse than a broken tent pole when you're out camping. Okay, we'll lay that one there, snap our other pole together. Okay, now that you've got your tent poles set up, my tent is great in that it kind of shows you where each pole goes. This one's color coded, so with this silver pole, I have gray tabs on either corner, and my gray pole, or my silver pole, is gonna go with the gray tabs. Then I have yellow tabs on the other corners, and I have a golden pole, so that's how that one's gonna go. What you're gonna wanna do, it's helpful if you have a buddy, so parents, this is a great time to involve your kids. Kids is a great time to help your parents out. but I'm gonna do it by myself. You're gonna put the ends of your poles into the grommets, or the circular metal things on the tabs of the corners of your tent. I like to go in kind of a four corners pattern rather than going crisscross. Okay, now the tricky part here is as this corner, or I push this one in, my tent's gonna start to go up, and then we're gonna have to make sure that we don't drop our poles or break them. Okay, and I'm gonna hold this one with me so that my tent doesn't all fall over. Use my head here. Oop, there we go. Okay, so now you should have something that looks like this with two poles that are crossed over. Now, without stepping on your tent, a lot of tents will have just regular old plastic snaps, and that's what's gonna hold your tent up on your poles. With mine, it's super easy. You just start snapping them on, and you're gonna go around and snap on all of the snaps that you have. Some tents have a fabric sleeve that your poles slide through, so if you are very confused at this point, take a look at your tent and see if it has any fabric sleeves that you can slide your poles into, as opposed to using these snaps like I have on my tent. And again, this is a great thing to do together. It's a little tricky when you're by yourself, so that you're not gonna risk breaking your tent, snapping any poles, or falling over and looking like a fool. But once it starts to get set up, it gets a little easier. Top of your tent, it's got two hooks. Well, mine does, yours may not. Most do. And you'll just slide those over your poles to help your tent stay up and give you a lot of space inside. There's two ways you can go here. You can either stake in the corners of your tent, or you can put the rain fly on next. I'm gonna stake in the corners just in case any wind comes through. It doesn't blow my tent away while I'm trying to set it up. So we will take our tent stakes and that big rock that we had from earlier that we set aside. We're gonna keep things easy with just 4 stakes for now. Later on, we may need to use more. What I like to do, pick a corner, and when you stake your stakes in, okay, so imagine that this rock is the ground. We don't always just want to go straight in like this, okay? We want to always put our stake in at a little bit of an angle, okay? And that way it's angled in towards the tent, and the wind isn't just going to yank our stakes out of the ground, okay? So start with corner number 1. Remember, stakes go in at a little bit of an angle. If you're good with numbers, let's say 20 to 30 degrees. If the ground is really hard, you can use a rock or a hammer if you've got one to hammer your stakes into the ground. Now, unlike with the poles, what I like to do is I like to go corner to corner so I can maximize the inside space of my tent. So I started with this, we'll call it the top right corner, and now I'm gonna go to the back left, and what I wanna do is pull those corners away from each other so I'm really maximizing that foundation area of my tent. All right, and the last step, and possibly the most important, is to throw your rain fly on. Unless you are 100% sure that there's not going to be any rain, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you put your rain fly on. A while ago, I was in Corpus Christi for a camp out, and young me was a bit full of himself and his camping skills, and I was like, yeah, I'll just sleep all night with the rain fly off. Didn't check the weather, it just looked like it was gonna be fine. At about 3 in the morning, thunderstorm blows through, and I am now soaked along with all of my gear and my tent partner, and we are up in the middle of the night in the dark. Our flashlights don't work because they were soaking wet, trying to put the rain fly on. So, unless you're 100% sure, just put your rain fly on. You'll be all the better for it. Okay, now with this tent, some are a little bit different, but this one has just regular old snaps on the corner, and the snaps will snap to each corner. Again, this one's color coded, so gray is gonna go to gray, yellow is gonna go to yellow. Sometimes it's helpful to do the corner to corner thing so that it doesn't pull off on one side, but whatever works best for you. Okay. I don't even know if I need to squat down here. So the very next step and the very last step in setting up our tent is Some tents have what's called a vestibule, which is a fancy word for saying a little bit more space outside the tent because of our rain fly. So if you take a look at mine, I've got 2 loops at the bottom here, and this loop opens up with a zipper so that I can access the inside of my tent. I'm gonna need to stake these down for 2 reasons. One, it's gonna give me more space so I can leave my dirty boots outside my tent. And 2, it's going to help me access the tent, and it's gonna keep water off the inside of the tent. So you're just gonna pull your vestibule out, and if you have one, great. If you don't, that's also great. You'll just take your extra stakes and stake them in, same thing like we did earlier. Put them at a little bit of an angle, and it's helpful to do both at the same time versus one or the other. Okay, so if all goes well, you should have a nice, good-looking vestibule, and you can slide on the inside there. You could unstake one side if you want to, totally up to you. And the last thing is with our equipment. So our tent bag and our stake bag and our pole bag, I like to put them all into one thing. Looking like a fool out here. Okay, that way you've got it all together, and just throw it in your tent. Don't leave it outside, don't tuck it under your tent, just put it inside the tent. It doesn't take up much room, and this way you're gonna make sure that you don't lose it. So, now that I've got my tent set up, I'm gonna take a nap because I'm getting kind of tired. So I will see you guys next time on our Adventure Guides virtual camping series. See you later.